Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, set in the waning days of two Germanys, The Prodigy, a thriller from Dee Replogle, who joins me on the program to discuss it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on it.
So your profession is not a writer by day, and so I'm curious, what leads people who have a day job to pursue writing in this fashion, and kind of like when did the kernels of this book start for you?
Well, the kernel of the book started about 4 years ago when my wife and I were in Berlin. And she said, you have such an interest in German history. You should write a book. And I said, oh, I don't think so, Penny. Said, I'm not an author. And she said, no, I think you really should. So I started on it. And then, last summer or so, she said, when are you going to finish that thing? Because if you don't finish it, I want you to clean up this room. Well, that did it. And I said, I'm on it, honey. And I finished it in about 90 days after that.
So it was her encouragement that both kickstarted it and finished it off. German history, though, was it specifically like this era of German history that was of interest?
No, I was interested in almost all of German history, even starting with the migrations. But, our family had a sort of a distant relationship to Germany. We came from Germany in the early 1700s to America. But it was sort of interesting because our family, apparently, at least on the paternal side, stayed primarily in German communities. So until they came, until they came to Oklahoma, they still were marrying into Germans. So my father had a strong interest in it, and I did also from him. And I just always was interested in history.
So you're in Berlin, you're on a trip, and that doesn't necessarily suggest that this is the story that you would end up telling. Why? What were the kernels of this specific story?
Well, this is going to sound really funny, but I really didn't have a great idea of what I wanted to do. And I did not outline the book before I started it. And I didn't know how a single chapter was going to end until I wrote it, let alone how the book would end. And I'd ended it a little bit earlier than the one that's actually in publication. And one of my friends reviewed it, who's an author and published author himself. And he said, Dee, said, I want to know what happened to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And so I dragged it on for about another 50 or 60 pages and finished it. But I guess really that's not very responsive to your question, Michael. The way I got interested in it was because I did have an interest in East Germany and its role in the post-World War II era. And I had an intense dislike for it. And so that, coupled with the fact that I was on a medical research foundation board and got very interested in neuroscience, just sort of led to the creation of Peter Stasi. And from that, the rest of the book just flowed.
So it was your board work that inspired the neuroscience aspect of this story?
I would say so, yes. I didn't really have any biology courses at school, and other than high school, but I just found neuroscience to be the most fascinating subject I'd ever encountered, and I'm still working on it.
So typically on a board, obviously it's like oversight or, kind of hand on the rudder, not necessarily like the granular kind of approach to things. Obviously enough of this became interesting that you then kind of explored some of the granular aspects.
That's exactly right. And I was very fortunate in meeting a man by the name of Richard Heyer, and I consider him to be the #1 neuroscientist on intelligence in the United States, if not in the world. And he has a worldwide reputation. And I sent him an email or actually I think it was a letter, almost a year ago, over a year ago now. And he kindly replied to it. And from that, I just got even more interested in, and I was asking him some questions. He said, "Why don't you read my book?" So I did, and then I was really hooked.
So then did you like obviously like you kind of in the initial ask, the letter, like did you then quiz him on some of like the science behind what you were writing within the book to try to kind of lend a certain like veracity, or did you allow yourself kind of some artistic license in that respect?
Well, no, I didn't at first, and I actually published the book without asking him to review it or to give me any comments on it. He was very kind in his comments, and I became convinced the more I read that the general concept of increasing intelligence, it was certainly possible. And he very kindly offered to, give me some technical advice on the second book that I'm writing, which is a sequel to the first one. And he and I become good friends. He invited me to a conference in Chicago last summer, and I got a chance to meet some very interesting people. And I'm just really sort of hooked on the subject.
So was Peter your initial character, like this idea of this child, like was that who kind of started the ball rolling for this story?
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, like the prodigy, Peter's the prodigy, the titular character. Um, but in terms of kind of like getting the ball rolling in terms of the action, Peter isn't necessarily the one, right? Like things happen to him rather than by him a lot of the time.
That's exactly right. He is the subject of the action, but not the propagator himself.
So as you mentioned, you didn't know where you were going each chapter to chapter. Like what was like the initial chapter then? That like
The
was
initial
it
chapter,
the one that's
I'm
in the
sorry,
book as the first chapter?
yes, absolutely. That's the way it started. It was the idea that how would I describe someone who was really super intelligent in a way that would excite, someone who was reading the book? Because I really wrote the book for myself.
So are you like a reader of thrillers? Is that like political or like spy thrillers? Is that kind of your genre of choice?
Oh, I love those. But I'm also interested in almost anything that's has to do with history.
Right. So as your own first reader, then you're trying to kind of hook yourself and push the story forward. Describing Peter rather than telling it from Peter's vantage point to begin with. What was the import of that?
Well, because I was describing his impact on the people around him. And that sort of led to a general feeling that how would the parents protect their child? And how committed was the father, who was going to be a very strong character, to his family? And it turned out he was very committed.
Right. So Friedrich, the father, a fairly high-ranking official in East Germany. Like how, like, did you map out kind of characteristics, or are you the type of person who like action suggests character?
It, no, I just sort of outlined him the way that I wanted him to be. And lots of times I would have to go back and change something that I'd written before as I changed the mode a little bit. But he was described the way that I wanted him to be, and that was all there was to it.
Now, when you say you had to go back and change things, like, do you find like that certain things he does later in the story, you then are like, oh, wait, this isn't jibe with how he behaved earlier?
Well, that's exactly right. The story about his escapade in Zurich, where he kills the guy that was embezzling money out of the Stasi, it was something that I'd written earlier, and then I'd taken it out. And when I got down to the point that really almost about three-fourths of the way through the book, where he needed to have funds in order to do some of the stuff that he was doing, I thought, I better go back to that original idea and flesh it out a little bit. So I did.
So as you're writing, are you kind of keeping one eye on like plot mechanics and then one eye on kind of like whether things add up, and like did you have like like notes on the side or something in terms of like does 2 plus 2 always equal 4 within your story?
No, I really didn't. The one thing that I did do was I would bounce ideas off my wife, who was sitting patiently on the couch while I was doing this stuff. And I'd say, honey, what do you think about this? And then I'd read a paragraph to her or something. And she'd say, well, I don't think that's realistic. And I'd say, why not? And she'd give me an idea and I'd change it.
Well, speaking of wives, Anna, Friedrich's wife, Peter's mother, like we get her perspective as well as Friedrich's perspective. How important was kind of like the varying takes on the action, like to provide a different vantage point?
I thought Anna was extremely important, and I liked the interplay between her and Peter as to which, her and Friedrich as to which one was the smarter, and that was fun to write.
Right. So as you're kind of like building out the familial relationship and the reconciling of like Friedrich and Anna with kind of who their child is and why it's important. I mean, ultimately they learn a lot about Peter, but initially it's a much more kind of like our child is under threat. We don't know why kind of aspect to things, in which kind of gets the action rolling. Was that important that they're kind of in the dark a little bit?
Yes, I thought so. It added a certain air of mystery to it, and I don't think we really got into Dr. Wittenberg until about the chapter 8 or so.
And it's Dr. Wittenberg's like letter essentially that starts things off, right? Like that he's kind of like looming. Was that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, the unanswered question in the story is whether Peter's intelligence is the product of natural reproduction or whether it's the product of Wittenberg's experiments. And Wittenberg is convinced it's the result of his experiments. But in science, unless you can duplicate a result, it really doesn't prove anything. So there was always this question of whether or not what he did was effective. Now, from a scientific standpoint, what he did was, at the extreme end of science fiction, but the mechanics of it and the idea of changing neural pathways is certainly within the realm of science even today. And in the second book, Peter is not exactly repeating the process of that Dr. Wittenberg used. He definitely isn't. But nevertheless, he's using a modified concept that by changing neural pathways, you can change someone's intelligence.
As you were writing the first book, did you have a sense that there was a second story here?
No, I didn't. I was I was really shocked when I wrote it and read it for the first time myself after I finished it. And I thought, okay, this isn't something that I'm ashamed of. So I'll give it to a couple of friends and see what they think. And their reaction was off the wall. And it shocked me. I mean, it pleased me, but it absolutely shocked me. And I had no idea that they would like that so much. And what was really interesting, Michael, is the people who were the most enthusiastic about it were women. And I had shown it to only people that I knew were really, really smart. And I'm very fortunate to work in a law firm where there are people like that. Many of them are number one in their class. And I get to work with those people on a daily basis. So their opinions mattered to me.
And did you like, I mean, not to say like that the like group of people that you did, it's like, a self-selecting group, but like were they, readers of this type of fiction, or like did you get a variety of kind of different kind of people's tastes so that you could kind of get a better sense of like how does this hit for someone who wouldn't normally read this?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is most of them did not read fiction at all. And The first person I gave it to was a girl that I'd worked with, 20 years ago. And she was no longer with the firm, but I thought her I mean, she was number one in her class, very, very smart. And she and I had worked on a case together and had a lot of fun. So I sent it to her. And I sent it to her on by email on a Saturday afternoon about 4 o'clock. And I thought, okay, she'll take, 4 or 5 days, maybe a week or two to finish it. She sent me back a glowing review by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. She'd stayed up most of the night reading it because she couldn't put it down. And another person who just wrote a glowing review on Amazon was a person who's a full professor at the University of North Carolina. And she saw the book by chance on her dad's coffee table when she was visiting him, and she started reading it. And now she's an anthropologist and certainly has written 2 award-winning books, but they're both on anthropological subjects, not fiction. And she thought it was just absolutely superb. And these reviews that I was getting from friends and from total strangers made me think that I should write a second book because all of them wanted one.
So there was demand based on kind of like how things ended with the first book.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not been widely circulated at all. In fact, I just hired a publicist about a week ago to work with me on getting it out. And as I told them, it's not the money. I don't need the money. But if there's something there that I don't want to leave anything on the table. And I enjoy writing so much that it'll be a pleasure to write one. And I want to write 3 of them.
Okay. So it sounds like in the way you're telling it, like the sense of discovery was kind of critical for you as the author, like that you're kind of learning the story as you go and learning kind of like to engage with it.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly right.
So then
It
I
was
want to ask
work.
you about kind of like the thrust of a lot of this book. I mean, because obviously there's the brain science and Peter being the prodigy, but like a lot of this is kind of an escape story. And I want to ask about kind of like the mechanics of this and like how much did it involve research at all? Like, were you kind of looking into like how would you get out if you were trying to get out in the waning days of East Germany?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I knew how buttoned down the East German state was as far as, ingress and egress was concerned. And so I had to figure out how fast, the jets that they had flew. Was it possible to have a 1 passenger or 2 passenger jet? Um, what was the geographical complexion of Europe at the time? And so when I did that, then actually my wife and I flew back to Berlin and took a train to Rostock. And I was very careful in looking out the window of the train as it went by and looking at the countryside. And that had a big impact on the way that the escape occurred.
So you got a sense of like the physical terrain that they would have had to escape via.
Yes, absolutely.
And then obviously like Rostock is one of the settings in which, they, abscond in a boat that like, was that important to you to kind of be boots on the ground and get a sense of place for this story?
I think so. Made it a lot easier to describe. And that's one of the characteristics that I'm trying to factor into the second book is, geographical accuracy.
So in something like Rostock, obviously like there's, a sequence where Friedrich kind of has to split off and try to find the boat while Anna and Peter, wait, and they end up in a playground, and there's like a certain sense of tension of like being witnessed or caught. Like, did you think, oh, I could just invent this playground, or like it doesn't have to be nearby from where he would have gone and left them at the restaurant? Like, was that something that crossed your mind, or did you want it to kind of ring true?
I invented the playground, but I wanted it to be reasonably accurate.
Right. So, maybe in terms of like the mechanics overall, like how much like plotting out at that point did you do in terms of like this, then that, then this follows that kind of action, or did you allow kind of yourself to kind of like come up with things and then maybe like tweak them afterwards?
No, I mean, when I wrote a chapter, it was absolutely ad hoc. I was just going from scratch, and I just thought I'd just make it exciting for me.
So you introduce a character Turpitz, who is basically like a hunter killer. He's like sicked on the family by higher ups, and then there's a change to kind of the relationship and his action. Was that a surprise to you even?
Yes, it was. He was my favorite character. Um, you know, the idea that he was related to the admiral who was the founder of the German Navy really made it a lot of fun. And so I looked up where they were from and the ancestral estate, etc. And that was really a lot of fun to write.
So like inventing a character who has some ties to real people when it comes to a story like this, like is there any caution about kind of like historical representation, or do you think, oh, this is a work of fiction, I can create someone who has like tangential relationship to this existing family, that's fine?
Well, Turpin's family was definitely, it was a fictional creation. At the same time, I don't think there was anything about his character other than the fact he was a killer that would disappoint the family. And the characters of the characters of the head of the Stasi and his his toady deputy were really fairly historically accurate. I mean, they're very accurate, and Marcus Wolf's character is very accurate.
Right. So obviously one of the things about these kind of characters, like motivation, Friedrich and Anna, their motivation is to protect Peter. That these Stasi folks like can kind of see the writing on the wall in terms of the dissolution of East Germany. I'm curious about kind of like how much thought did you give to kind of like, is it self-protection? Is it, ideological? What motivates each of these people?
I think it was entirely self-protection and his love for his family and commitment to his family and to get them to safety. There was also a motivation of a sort of an historical dislike for communism that certainly raised its head a number of times in the book. But his primary motivation was to secure the safety of his family.
So Friedrich, obviously, like you said, you had to kind of like write back in the Zurich hit with the embezzler to kind of like get him the funds that he needed to, make his way out. Um, at that point in the story, though, like his motivation for doing that is to kind of please his higher up, but at the same time, decides to squirrel this stuff away, not knowing there's any threat to his family. Like, did you ever waffle on like how Friedrich would behave? Like, was he, a fully committed person up to a certain point, or like always ambivalent?
No, I knew. I Well, from the very beginning, when he left Forst, Germany, his hometown, he was clearly a work in process. His character was not fully formed. His ideological orientation wasn't fully formed. He knew of his father's pathological hatred for communism, which anybody that was, trapped in the Russian POW camps at the end of the war would have. But as far as his own perceptions, they were formed in part by his teachers and the people whom he knew. And so he couldn't really associate the people whom he saw on a daily basis with the characters that were in his father's memory. But the more he got into it, the more he realized that there was a very sinister aspect to East Germany. And by the time he never fully committed to East Germany. I tried to make that very clear in the book. He was never fully committed.
The escape from East Germany, obviously like a large thrust of the book, but there's essentially like a third act in America. Was was it always clear to you, like once you finished kind of getting them out of Germany, did you ever think, oh, this could be the end, or was it clear that there was kind of still a looming threat and you needed to write that threat out?
No, when my first inning ended in Geneva,
Okay.
and that's when my friend who was the author said, "Dee," said, "I need to know what happened to these guys. You need to keep writing." So I wrote in the rest of the book that way.
So that's that extra 50 pages they asked for
Yeah, you can blame that
is
on
the Utah
my friend here.
chapters.
Right.
Um, and like, because then you obviously then have to build in like why there and invent that. Like, did you give some thought to like where would they end up?
Yes,
Based
I
on
did.
yeah.
I was very familiar with Park City, and so that made it easy. And the idea that they could blend into a ski community made a lot of sense because of the strong, Swiss and German elements that are in a ski area today. So that just sort of made sense.
Sure enough. So it sounds like kind of like instinctual in some sense, and then like kind of refining those instincts on edit is maybe kind of the process for you.
Yeah, I didn't do a whole lot of editing. Um, it was again the purpose, the way that I write is for myself. And when I wrote this book, I never expected it to do anything other than just have some Xerox copies given to friends. And it was only through the encouragement of others that I went ahead and had it published. And it was only through the encouragement of some of the people who'd read it that I thought I ought to take the next step and see if I can really get it publicized.
And then obviously that now leads to a second book and aims for a third.
Right.
So it's a gradual a step, one foot in front of the other is kind of your process, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is. And, I'm sort of at the end of my legal career. I practiced for 50 something years and I'm tired of it. And so I'm ready to move on to another aspect. I certainly don't want to just sit at home. And this was a wonderful avenue to pursue.
So does the second book give you opportunity for boots on the ground research as well?
Not so much. In
No.
fact, that's one of the subjects this summer is where shall it take place? And I have two cities in mind. They're both in former West Germany. I'm pretty sure I know which one it is, but I need to find out which one of them has the best neurological science lab.
Well, there you go. Well, that's a question for a future conversation. But Dee, thanks very much for joining me for this one. Congrats on the release of the Prodigy.
Well, thank you very much. You're very, very kind to reach out and ask me to participate in this.